Thank you very much, Sophia, for this presentation. So you have seen, I think it's a little exotic for me to speak about Terpni, but let's go. So since 2022, the French School at Athens and the Ephorate of Antiquities of Ceres have been exploring the site of Terpni and the surrounding area. Terpni is located on the right bank of the Strymon Valley near the modern town of Nigrita, some 20 kilometers south of Ceres in ancient Byzantium. Ça fait une souris aussi. So you can see the situation of Terpni and Nigrita on the map. The site itself is located at Paliocastro on one of the hills extending at the foot of Mount Vertiscos in a strategic position. This is a small site, only 1.7 hectares in size, rising to an altitude of around 200 meters and offering unobstructed view over parts of the valley. For example, toward the east and or toward the north with the Ceres in the background. It is close to a small river and not far from the beginning of a road. Yeah. That crossed the Vertiscos Mountains to reach Mygdonia to the west. The Strymon Valley is an eminently strategic axis, one of the main roads for penetrating the Balkans from the northern Asian coast. This is the road used today to reach Sofia in Bulgaria and Skopje in northern Macedonia, following the valley of the Strumica, one of the Strymon's main tributaries on the right bank. The Strymon Valley was crossed by the Via Egnatia, which skirted the Pangaea Massif from the north, linking Thessaloniki to Constantinopolis. Various populations settled here: Thracian, who formed the native population, Greeks from the 7th century BC, especially in the lower valley south of the Ropel Pass, which is here, and where is now the frontier, the border between Bulgaria and Greece. The Greeks came to exploit the resources of the territory, both agricultural and natural, in particular metals such as gold and silver in the form of mineral deposits. The mines of the Pangaea, which is here, are very well known, or the gold extracted from the rivers. Sorry. The city of Argylos was founded at the mouth of the Strymon in the 7th century by Andros, then replaced by Amphipolis, founded by Athens in 437. The Macedonian first took an interest in the region in the first half of the 5th century under Alexander I, who conquered territories and founded Eporia. But it was Philip II who finally incorporated the region into the Kingdom of Macedonia. The valley became part of the Roman province of Macedonia, created in 146. Then it became part of the Diocese of Mysia under Diocletian, and during the 4th century of the Diocese of Macedonia. At that time, it was part of Illyricum and the provinces of Latin influence, and then came under the control of Constantinople from the 5th century. The Strymon Valley was the place of an intense flow of wealth and people, sometimes hostile, as the Goths in the 3rd and 4th century. The valley was occupied by a large number of settlements, large cities such as Amphipolis, Heraclea and Partikopolis, which developed from the imperial period onwards, and smaller settlements scattered around the foothills and the periphery of a great lake. I tried to show, to draw a lake. You can see this lake occupied the final part of the valley, not far from the Strymon move. And another hypothesis by Angelos Zanis. The lake was drained at the beginning of the 20th century, which profoundly changed the profile and landscape of the valley. The history of the region remains largely unknown, however. Although many rescue excavations take place, only a few sites have been the subject of regular excavations, such as Amphipolis, Argylos, and Tragylos. The ancient site of Terpni has long been known. The famous English traveler William Leake passed through there at the beginning of the 19th century. He reported that the inhabitants of the region tried to sell him coins, many of them minted by the kings of Macedonia. But it was not until 1965 that the first research was carried out there by Evangelia Yuri from the Ephorate of prehistoric and classical antiquities of Kavala. After the discovery of a Macedonian tomb that had been looted about 2 kilometers from the site. The tomb consisted of a dromos and a single vaulted chamber with 3 sarcophagi. Its date is from the late 4th century or early 3rd century BC. According to an inscription, you can see that on the map on the slide, it belonged to 2 brothers of the Macedonian aristocracy, Hipponax and Dioscorides, sons of Apollodoros. This Apollodoros has been identified as one of Alexander's companions, mentioned by the ancient historian, and known to have been from Amphipolis, but the name of Apollodoros is very common, so the hypothesis is very difficult to prove. Paleocastro was also the victim of illicit excavations that affected several tombs in the necropolis located north to the site. In 1981, important construction works led to the discovery of ancient remains. It was therefore decided to start an exploratory excavation in 1985, which revealed Roman and Hellenistic remains. The potential of the site led the Ephorate of prehistoric and classical antiquities of Kavala to start regular excavation in 1993 under the direction of Mariana Caramberi. However, due to a lack of financial resources, it was not possible to continue, although the results produced after 4 months of excavation were significant. The section of the rampart, preserved to a height of 1.80 meters, was uncovered over a length of 150 meters. The sector explored in 1955 was extended, which revealed the remains of buildings used for the production of wine and the processing of agricultural products, with areas for trading grapes associated with large pitoi. One here. As well as several millstones. These buildings have been dated to the imperial period, while lower walls seem to date to the Hellenistic period. Finally, in the area damaged in 1951, the remains of a large basilical building associated with thermal bath were uncovered. We'll see the architectural history of this building appears to be complex. The excavators has considered that the building was in use from the 2nd to the mid-century AD, with a period of reoccupation in the 6th century. In its last state, as you can see, it was a 5-aisled basilica. Other discoveries were interesting. Beautiful pieces of architecture, including a Corinthian capital with eagles, probably from the 6th century, although Mariana Caramberi proposed a date during the imperial period. Or a male marble head, slightly larger than life-size, and a relief depicting a Thracian horseman. I don't have a picture of this relief. Several inscriptions are also known. The most important is engraved on a 2-meter high stele that was reused in a tomb where it was found. This is the dedication of a building dating from the 2nd, 3rd century AD. It reports that a basilica, an exedra, and 3 joining oikoi were built in a city whose name is not specified, unfortunately for us, using funds bequeathed to a certain Julia by her husband, who came from this place. The basilica has been identified as the building excavated by Mariana Caramberi, and the text also reveals that the town had the statue of Polis, which is particularly interesting. Another inscription, probably funerary, is engraved on the column shafts and consists of list of names engraved under the bust of a figure, some of which are of Thracian origin, some of the name are of Thracian origin. We know also a dedication of statues to Zeus and Hera, apparently from the Roman period. A stele reused in a church in the village of Terpni, which is located nearby, bears an inscription stating that a priest named Isidoros, son of Apollos, offered a temple to Horus Harpocrates. The date of this inscription has been set at the 1st century BC or the 2nd or 3rd century AD, depending on the scholars. Mariana Caramberi also found a secoma with an inscription that is very difficult to interpret, in which she sees an allusion to the production of gold and perhaps the mention of an agronome. The object and its inscription will be published very soon by Angelos Zanis and Emile Nankov in the next issue of the Bulletin de Correspondance Hellénique. So if you are interested, we will be able to read the BCH. In any case, there are gold deposits in the region. Near the site, on the other side of the river, there are traces of ore extraction with large amounts of crushed stone. The ceramic material found during these first excavations testifies to the long occupation of the site. The oldest ceramics date from the 2nd half of the 6th century BC. Attic black figure pottery, Corinthian Arybalos and Exalyptra, and a Ionian Kilix. Mariana Caramberi also mentions red figure pottery, Hellenistic black glazed pottery, relief balls, including 2 fragments decorated with mythological figures. We know that because of the legend who named the figure. Western slope pottery and Roman terra sigillata. Various coins have also been collected. So I show you the list of the authorities who minted the coin. So from Amintas III to Valentinian II. So these are the finds made by Mariana Caramberi. So you can see the settlement was inhabited from the Archaic period until late antiquity and had the status of a polis, at least for a part of its history. unfortunately, we don't know its name. In general, the toponymy of the entire region remains uncertain and controversial, despite the research of several historians, including Fanoula Papazoulou, Angelos Zanis, and Misiad Ratzopoulos. Mariana Karamberi and Misiad Ratzopoulos suggested that this was the site of ancient Berge. However, the discovery of an inscription now allows Berge to be located on the left bank of the Strymon, near modern Neos Scopus. Another proposal puts at Terpni the settlement of Grairo. I think it's an alarm. So for the people who are online, we have an alarm. Okay. So another proposal puts at Terpni the settlement of Grairo, mentioned on the Potenge table as a station on the road linking Amphipolis to Heraclea Sintica, between Eporea, ancient Eporia, and Trinlo, probably Tragilos. But Grairo is not mentioned anywhere else. And other proposals have been made. The research that we have been carrying out for 3 years may enable us to identify the city. As I said at the beginning, it's a collaboration between the French school and the Ephorate of Sève with an international team. The Terpni excavation is also conceived as a training program for the scientific members of the French school who are in position of responsibility. Research is being carried out at several levels. At the Paleocastro site, we have started new excavation, and we are also studying the monuments uncovered by Mariana Karamberi. We have also begun a study of the territory and the cultivation of the vines under the direction of Clémence Pagnou from the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle de Paris and Ninon Blond from the École Normale Supérieure de Lyon. This research is part of a more general program, Viti Orient, dedicated to the study of vines and wine production in Eastern Mediterranean, developed with the French Institute of Oriental Archaeology in Cairo. Olga Boubounel, a scientific member of the French school, has also begun a study of the occupation of the lower Strymon Valley during the Roman period. For all this work, we have the support of the French school at Athens, the Ephorate of Sève, and also the French Ministry of Europe and Foreign Affairs, as well as funding from Dumbarton Oaks for the study of the fine nave basilica. And thank you for that. I will say only a few words about the work carried out in the territory. It consists of a geomorphological and environmental study, a foot and vehicle survey of approximately 600 kilometers was carried out in 2022 to identify the main geomorphological components and the current and ancient morphogenetic dynamics of the Strymon Valley and the Terpni region. More intensive prospecting was carried out in the immediate vicinity of the site, and interviews were conducted with the local people to gain a better understanding of recent landscape changes, viticultural history, and also agricultural practices. The aim is to establish a data set of vineyard soils through core sampling and sedimentological analysis. Let's now turn to the work carried out at Paleocastro. The first aim of the excavations is to characterize the nature of the occupation, to establish a stratigraphic sequence, and to specify the stages of the historical development of the site over the entire period of its occupation. The first step was to carry out a geophysical survey to provide initial information on the degree of preservation of the remains and to inform the excavation strategy. This initial research was carried out by Peter Zidarov from the University of Tübingen and Christian Tsankov from St. Ivan Rilski University in Sofia. They made a geomagnetic survey and a georadar survey. The former showed that the entire site is occupied by architectural remains organized by a network of streets. To the northeast of the site, a long anomaly, slightly circular in shape, clearly corresponds to an important urban axis visible for almost 100 meters. Voyez pas? The anomaly disappears near the sectors excavated in 1993. They are covered by metal shelters that interfere with the magnetic fields. But if we continue the word, the continuation of the word leads to a large threshold that comes to the surface southeast of the five-aisled basilica. At the other end, the streets may have extended towards what is a modern access point to the site, but perhaps an ancient one too. Other anomalies are perpendicular and seem to correspond to secondary roads that follow a fairly regular urban grid. A road network also appears to be present in the western part of the site, with streets running northwest-southeast. But there is also a worker anomaly running roughly west-east, which can be followed to the southwest of the winery and to the other end of the site. Yeah. At least. The georadar survey also produced very interesting results. The most spectacular is the discovery of another church with three naves, the plan of which appears very clearly. According to Peter Zidarov and Christian Tsankov, there may also have been a very large monument to the south of the Great Basilica, but the anomalies caused by the shelters prevent it from being clearly seen. These results have led us to open several exploration zones. 3 sectors were excavated in 22 and 23, so in blue and red. The first, zone 1, is located to the west on the highest part of the site, which forms a relatively flat terrace at this point. A second zone, zone 2, is on the northern edge of the hill, northwest of the five-aisle basilica and close to the current access road to the site. The third sector, zone 3, is located on the site of the basilica revealed by the survey. And in 2024, we continued our work, so it's the green color. We continue our work in zones 1 and 3 and began to study the five-aisle basilica, which correspond to our zone 4. So I will begin with zone 2. In this area, modern activities and attempts at looting have caused erosion of the slope and revealed the presence of ancient structures in a cut, a wall, a mud brick structure, a layer of burnt earth, and some mortar. I don't know if you can see that. So the wall, the mud bricks, the mortar, and the earth, earth and the burnt earth, sorry. Protohistoric pottery was also found in the cut. The excavations were led by Jean-François Gay in 2022 and by Dimitra Malamidou and Bastien Rueff in 2023. Under layers of colluvium and rubble, the remains of a late Roman kiln, probably tetragonal in shape, were uncovered, to which the mud brick and mortar surface belonged. The surface formed the bottom of the kiln, surmounted by two low mud brick walls supporting the superstructure, which disappear. The few pieces of scoria found nearby suggest a link with metallurgy, but further research is needed to determine the exact function of this structure. Just below the kiln, we also excavated a protohistoric pit dug into the natural soil. It contained 2 or 3 superimposed surfaces of combustion consisting of simple earthen floors separated by layers of ashy earth. The most recent flow rested on about 30 flattened shards of storage vessels, probably from the Iron Age. The pit also cut through an older layer that covered the natural soil and in which was found a deep cup with a handle. Sorry. Almost complete, which could date back to the 8th century BC and represents a terminus postquem for the digging of the pits. For the moment, these are the earliest traces of occupation on the hill. Yangus Chalazonitis is in charge of the excavation in Zone 1. After 3 years, the sectors covers an area of 150 square meters. We are uncovering a residential area, the remains of which are just below the present surface of the hill. The buildings extend along both sides of a road. This is the anomaly that appear that I show you before. So far, we have uncovered several sets of walls that extend north of the road, but not the constructions that develop further south, of which only the northern walls have been identified. These constructions belong to 3 successive phases of occupation. The most recent, currently dated to the 6th century, is represented by dry stone walls that form relatively coherent structures. A second phase, which could be placed at the transition between the 5th and 6th century, is represented by walls built with the rubble and a few fragments of architectural terracotta bound together with a white mortar. These walls sometimes serve as foundations for the more recent one, but their overall organization is more difficult to reconstruct. An even earlier phase has been identified in a deep pit, but until now, only one wall has been seen. The surface of the road consisted of a 30 centimeter thick layer of compacted gravel mixed with shell fragments and pottery shards. As you can see, it was interrupted by a wide trench that we excavated in 2024, the function of which is a mystery. It seems to be contemporary with the other structures. No pipes were found. It is possible that a trench was dug to lay some, but the work was abandoned before completion. In the last phase of occupation, it seems that working areas were located in the street. One of them was a semicircular platform made of very compact orange earth. A lot of scoria also come from all the zone. The more recent and best known phase of occupation was preceded by the excavation of large pit in blue on the slide. filled with spoil and used as a rubbish dump, but it contained numerous animal bones, mainly pigs with traces of cutting, and it seems that the pit also contained some bones of a human baby. The structure from this last phase consisted of two rooms, probably bordered to the east by a side street that separated it from another excavated building. The main room had a small hearth in the center, used for cooking, next to a circular working surface made with terracotta plates. A series of 4 post holes at regular intervals near the northern wall suggest also the presence of a shelf against the wall or some kind of mezzanine. The second room to the north was a storeroom whose walls and roof had collapsed, covering a large pitos and other vases, amphora, and pots. The pitos was originally in the northeast corner of the room, from where it fell towards the center of the room. So this is a residential area, very simple, with artisanal testimonies of artisanal activities. Let's now turn to zone 3, where the basilica identified by the Georadar survey has been excavated for 3 years under the direction of Olga Bubunel, Priscilla Khali, and Efthymios Rizos. Once again, the remains were very close to the surface, at least in the eastern half. We managed to uncover almost the entire building over an area of more than 400 square meters. This basilica is smaller than the one already known. Our findings suggest that it was in use in the 6th century and perhaps at the beginning of the 7th century. However, a slightly later, earlier date cannot be ruled out for its construction. The remains were covered with a layer of destruction, which was identified everywhere and which contained tiles, floor slabs, and various elements of stone architecture, fragments of column shafts, small columns, and a fragment of stone, of a plate sculpted on both sides, coming perhaps from the chancel fence. The building, including the apse, was about 21 meters long and 13 meters wide. Most of the elevation has been destroyed, but in some places, the first courses of the walls have been preserved up to a maximum height of 60 centimeters. These walls are between 60 and 80 centimeters thick and are built in opus mixtum with alternating layers of stone, sometimes very large, especially on the outer faces, and layers of bricks. The external faces are covered with a layer of white mortar, while the internal faces are covered with a white mural plaster. The basilica had 3 naves and a narthex, preceded to the west by a structure that must have been a portico, the roof of which had collapsed. We excavated part of the roof. This portico was only resting on the western facade of the basilica and could have been built in a second state. To the northwest of the church, there was also clearly an annex, but we did not have time to identify its boundaries. We know the stilobat between the central and the south halls, which supported a colonnade of 4 columns resting on 5 bricks, separated from each other by a distance of 2.5 meters. Several of elements of the column drums have been preserved. We found a big one, as you can see. We have no information about the furnishings of the basilica, as all the movable objects has been removed. There was a bench in the northwest corner of the narthex. We can also reconstruct the position of the chancel, so the enclosure that separated the sanctuary from the rest of the central nave. Its position is indicated by the presence of two thick bands of mortar that start from the stylobats and run at right angles to the center of the nave, forming the prostone. Two door sockets at the end of the bands, as well as a groove in the mortar of the pavement, indicate the presence of a locking system. On the south side, the fence was supported by a pillar, which is here, and which rested on the stylobat. So it seems that the south and north sides of the fence were placed between the columns that separated the central nave from the two side naves. The few elements found in the destruction layer suggest that the enclosure had large slabs. So I show you again the slide. Large slabs set between pillars in the lower register and a series of small columns in the upper register. The basilica had rich floor decoration in the form of opus sectile in the central nave and in the narthex. The floor of the southern aisle was paved with large terracotta slabs, one of which bore an incised cross and other animal footprints. The floor of the northern nave is unknown. In the central nave and in the narthex, the opus sectile floor was in the form of large rectangular panels delimited by rows of larger slabs of right color. The slabs were set in a thick layer of mortar, and we know how they were arranged thanks to the imprint they left in the mortar. Since, as you can see on the slide, most of the slabs have been looted and are no longer preserved. They were made of white marble combined with schist and colored stones whose nature is not yet known, but we are going to try to make analysis. The slabs sometimes rested on a support made of ceramic shards or pieces of schist. Some slabs were carved from reused material, architectural fragments, and even inscribed stela. In the mortar, we found the printed letters of two different inscriptions that had been cut into the shape of two paving stones. One dates back to the first half of the 1st century AD and probably mentions a high priest of the imperial cult. And the other dates back to the end of the 2nd or beginning of 3rd century and is less legible. It is possible to read the adjective illustrious. These inscriptions were found at the end of the last campaign and are currently being studied by Olga Bubunel. I think she's here, so if you have questions, you have to speak to her. The decoration of the narthex was a symmetrical composition determined by the position of the door opening into the central nave. In a central position, a panel whose dimensions correspond to those of the doorway was decorated with white squares formed by 4 small slabs bordered by black rectangular slates and small square in the corner. On either side were 2 panels formed by a disorganized assemblage of stones decorated with a circle contained in a lozenge. The 2 motifs are framed by dark-colored stone, which are blue, black, blue, or green. In the central nave, the sanctuary itself where several slabs have survived, was decorated with a chessboard pattern of white squares on the point, smaller white squares, and black triangles at the corner. But in three places, this paving is interrupted by three square panels with more refined geometric ornamentation placed in a staggered arrangement, one on the axis of the apse and the other two aligned and offset to the west. To the east of the central panel, in the axis of the apse, but unfortunately in a very damaged area, there was a rectangular pit whose walls were covered with mortar, probably for a reliquary. Further west, beyond the chancel fence, the composition was organized around a large central panel decorated with a lozenge pattern of rectangular slabs in a square. On either sides of the central panel, to the east and to the west, two other panels were decorated with the same motif of white squares on the points, surrounded by black rectangular slates and small white squares at the corner. There is still little evidence to clarify the chronology and the phases of occupation of the church. It is possible that some renovation took place at a later date, and also that the building was abandoned for a period before being destroyed. But the ceramic material doesn't currently provide reliable chronological data. Most contexts contain mixed material with shards from the Hellenistic and imperial period, coexisting with later shards generally from the 6th century AD. Finally, let's turn to the Great Basilica, which we began to study in 2024 with Sotiria Krimadi, the architect of the mission. The monument was completely excavated in 1993, but we lack information on its stratigraphy, and we have opened several excavations on its periphery to reconstruct the stratigraphy. These excavations were carried out under the direction of Elie Bia and Laurianne Pop. The history of the building is obviously long and complicated. In its final state, the basilica measures approximately 30 meters long and 22 meters wide. It was built in the imperial era as a civil basilica associated with a bath complex, of which we know 2 rooms. It was later transformed into a church, probably with 3 naves, and later enlarged into a basilica with 5 naves. Actually, this is the interpretation of Mariana Carambery, and for now we don't have any evidence to change this interpretation, but we need to wait the end of the study, and maybe it will be totally different. During the last campaign, we concentrated mainly on the walls that appear in several places outside the building. Some belong to buildings located to the west of the narthex, while others are isolated to the south and southeast of the basilica, where the monumental stone threshold I mentioned earlier is located. Some are included in the berm that forms the southern boundary of the terrace of the basilica, which has led to assume that the building was enclosed by a surrounding wall. The study is at an early stage, and I cannot go into the detail. Major development work was undertaken before the construction of the basilica. The hill and probably the earlier archaeological levels were excavated to level the ground and create a terrace on which the monument was built. To the west, the basilica, to the west of the basilica, the natural terrain was partially removed and the building rests on the natural soil. It was at a lower level on the eastern side where it was not reached by the excavation. We can also show that there was no enclosure wall to the south. The wall into the berm belonged to another building extending toward the south, and we will have to clarify its relationship with the basilica. The threshold is connected to a wall that turned toward the west on its north side. The excavators of 1923 thought that these walls were older than the basilica, which is possible, but they were still in place in the second half of the 6th century when the basilica had taken its 5-nave shape. But further excavations are needed to clarify the architectural and stratigraphic sequence of the area. This great basilica was also richly decorated. As in the previous one, the narthex and central nave were paved with opus sectile, organized in large panels separated by rows of larger slabs, while the side aisles were paved with terracotta, at least this one. In the narthex, only the central part was decorated. The opus sectile floor formed a kind of carpet in front of the monumental door leading into the central nave, and its dimensions were roughly the same as those of the opening. The decoration was particularly rich due to the use of more elaborate motifs than in other parts of the building, using slate tiles and stones of various colors: green, red, blue, gray, black, white, sometimes coming from reused architectural blocks and even again from an inscribed stela. We do not know what the floor looked like on both sides of the preserved portion, but there may have been terracotta slabs. The monumental doorway leading into the central nave had 2 columns delimiting 3 passages. This determined the organization of the decoration, divided into 3 large panels whose dimensions corresponded to those of the passage. But I won't go into detail about this decoration, but you can see that it is more elaborate than in the other church. Here too, one of the panels appears in the form of an assemblage of disorganized and irregular pieces of stone, drawing a black circle contained in a large lozenge with barely visible borders. The floor of the central nave was decorated with a geometric orthogonal composition of large panels bordered by bands of large white or darker slabs. One band ran along the bottom of the walls, and a row of large slabs, 55 centimeters wide, one lengthwise in the center of the nave, in line with the central doorway. The central line at the foot of the wall, and other narrower slabs of different size were arranged transversally, dividing the space into 2 by 5 panels. The best preserved were composed of a chessboard of squares, alternating with squares on the point and triangles at the corner, smaller on the south side than on the north, and with the reverse color scheme. On both sides of the entrance to the sanctuary, 2 panels were decorated with hexagons in a symmetrical composition, hexagon and triangles of different sizes and reversed between the south and north sides. So as you can see, the decoration is very similar in both basilicas, suggesting that the Ale Basilica and the bigger one were at some point contemporary. The Great Basilica was in use in the 6th century and even the beginning of the 7th century, something that the first excavators did not see. This is also shown by the study of the ceramics from the surveys opened in 2024. The opus sectile floor patterns of the 2 basilica were widely used in the Augustan period, but were also known in late antiquity. The same kind of decoration are well known during the Proto-Byzantine period through the Eastern Mediterranean, in Greece, for example, at Neankialos, Veria, Edessa, but also in Cyprus or even in the Levant, where the same layout with panels bordered with wider slabs is found. Terpni opus sectile floors also fit perfectly into a regional setting. The same motifs are used in the basilicas of Amphipolis, dating from the early 6th century, in the baptistery of the Episcopal Basilica of Sandanski, now in Bulgaria, or in Philippi, in the Basilica of the 5th and 6th century, or in the thermal complex near the Basilica of the Octagon. One last example, the Basilica of Arethusa, some 30 kilometers southwest of Terpni, as the crow fly, which offers a very interesting parallel dating from the late 5th or early 6th century. The floor of the central nave was divided into 4 panels separated by rows of large slabs, arranged according to the technique already observed at Terpni, which consists of using an assembly of irregular stones decorated with circles inscribed in lozenges. Although this technique is attested elsewhere in Greece, so the technique of using irregular stone, this technique is, it seems to have been particularly popular in Macedonia, especially in Thessaloniki in the 5th century. This should not be seen as a cheaper way of working, but rather as a fashion statement. But from the general point of view, this Basilica of Arethusa is a good parallel for the three-nave Basilica of Terpni. With the exception of ceramics, our excavation didn't yield much material. I show you the best pieces, so you can see it's not very beautiful. We have a lot of glass fragments in all the excavation area, especially glass foot bases of a type found in the region. For example, in Arethusa, we have exactly the same base. There is also a relatively large collection of bronze coins, about 70 in all, dating from the reign of Philip II to that of Justinian, with the period most represented are those of Justinian and the 4th century, but this was with the coins found in 2022 and 2023. I received today the study of the coin found in 2024, and we have a lot of coins from the 4th century. And also Hellenistic coins too. And I put some coins for Sophia. The pottery material found in our excavation dates from the Hellenistic period to the beginning of the 7th century AD. It's being studied by Vangelis Papaioannou, who is writing his thesis at the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens under the supervision of Platon Petridis. The vast majority of pottery is of local or regional origin and similar to that produced in nearby centers such as Philippi. It consists mainly of utilitarian vessels, kitchenware, simple tableware, or storage containers. There are also a lot of imitations of widespread form like Terra sigillita forms or lamps, imitation of lamps. I show you one. For example, so local or regional versions of lamps from Asia Minor. The imported wares are most often fine tableware, amphora, and lamps. For the Hellenistic period, these imports are represented mainly by shards of fine black glazed pottery, perhaps belonging to drinking vessels. A few shards of molded bowls with relief decoration also come from Attic and Ionian workshops. And there are also some fragments of the so-called Ephesian Greek plates of the 1st century BC. For the imperial period, almost all the imports are from Asia Minor, especially Eastern Sigillita sea chandelier ware, which is a common phenomenon in Eastern Macedonia. But we have also a small amount of Eastern Sigillita B from the Meander Valley. For the late antiquity and the beginning of the Byzantine period, we have large quantities of Macedonian grey ware, which was common in northern Greece and the Balkans at that time. Most of the forms known elsewhere are represented at Terpni, but two types are known only at Terpni, which is the center of the world, as you can see. The majority of the amphora shards belong to late Roman amphora category, and almost all of them belong to the B1 subcategory, which was produced during the 6th and probably 7th century in Cilicia and Cyprus. Finally, there are a few imported lamps. So these first results provide evidence for the final phase of the settlement's history in the 6th century. But the site was first occupied much earlier, around 1,000 years earlier, towards the end of the 8th century BC. There is currently no proof that the site was continuously occupied, although our findings seem to indicate that it was. The Macedonian tomb and the discovery of Hellenistic coins, although our team did not excavate any layers from this period, suggest that the settlement was of some importance at that time. The presence of a civil basilica in the imperial period and the fact that the settlement was then a city suggests that it was also the case at that time, so around the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century AD, with a change during the 4th century. It should be noted that few civil basilica are known in Greece. Later, in the 6th century, there were at least 2 basilicas, including one with 5 naves, richly decorated and of exceptional character. Until now, public buildings and churches of the size and luxury of those found at Terpni were mainly expected to be found in large cities such as Amphipolis, Partikopolis, Philippi, Thasos, or Stobi. We note, however, that a seemingly lesser place could afford to build basilica whose size and luxury were on a par with those of the largest urban centers. We need, however, to examine the function of the settlement more closely for this period. Was it just a small town where wealthy people lived? Did it have a religious function? Mariana Karambehi has dated the winemaking installations to the imperial period, but a preliminary survey of the pottery material she has found suggests that they are more likely to date from the Proto-Byzantine period. So this sector, this artisanal sector, could therefore be a production area linked to the two basilicas. And we will begin the study of this installation this year. In any case, it's clear that the settlement, although small, was of real importance. Perhaps it should be assumed that it was a center or one center of a political community spread over several localities. Anyway, we must reconsider the question of its ancient name by examining all the evidence, hoping that new discoveries will enable us to find this name, to find an answer, to have the name of this settlement. Thank you for your attention.